The sound of hooves thundering across the Arizona desert was the only warning Willa Kent had before she pressed herself deeper into the shadowed crevice between two sun-bleached boulders, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might give her away. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since that terrible night in Tucson when Marshal Edmund Grayson had pointed his tobacco-stained finger at her and declared her a murderer in front of half the town. The accusation was a lie, a cruel fabrication designed to protect the real killer. But truth seemed to matter little when the law had already made up its mind. The rider passed within 20 yards of her hiding spot, close enough that she could see the dust coating his black hat and the rifle strapped to his saddle. Her breath caught in her throat as he slowed his horse, scanning the rocky terrain with sharp eyes. She remained absolutely still, ignoring the scorpion that crawled across her boot, focusing every ounce of willpower on becoming invisible. After what felt like an eternity, the rider clicked his tongue and urged his mount forward, disappearing around a bend in the canyon. Willa waited another full hour before emerging from her hiding spot, her legs cramped and aching from holding the same position for so long. The October sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. She had perhaps 2 hours of daylight left to reach Nogales, Arizona, a border town where she hoped to disappear long enough to figure out her next move. Maybe she could cross into Mexico, start over somewhere the law would never think to look for her. She had been 23 years old when her life fell apart, working as a bookkeeper for the Silver Star Mining Company in Tucson. The work was steady, the pay decent, and she had even started to build a life for herself after her parents had died from cholera 2 years prior. Then Henry Blackwell, the company's chief accountant, had been found dead in the office one evening with a letter opener buried in his chest. Willa had discovered the body when she returned to retrieve a ledger she had forgotten, and in her panic, she had pulled the letter opener free, trying desperately to see if Henry was still alive. That was how Marshal Grayson had found her, standing over the body with the murder weapon in her blood-covered hands. She had tried to explain, tried to tell them about the discrepancies she had found in the company books, the money that was being siphoned away through false invoices and phantom employees. Henry had been investigating the same irregularities, and they had planned to present their findings to the company owner the very next day. Someone had silenced Henry before he could talk, and now they wanted to silence her too by letting the law do their dirty work. But Marshal Grayson had not been interested in her explanations. He had been a friend of Victor Sterling, the mine foreman who Willa suspected was behind the embezzlement scheme. The marshal had arrested her on the spot, ignoring her pleas and protests. She had spent one terrifying night in a cell before a sympathetic deputy named Tom Henderson had slipped her the keys and urged her to run. He had seen Sterling leaving the office building around the time of the murder. He whispered through the bars, but Grayson would not listen to reason. If she stayed, she would hang for certain. So Willa had run, stealing away into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the few dollars she kept hidden in her boot. She had been moving ever since, sleeping in caves and abandoned line shacks, eating whatever she could forage, or the occasional charity meal from someone who did not recognize her face from the wanted posters that had started appearing in every town between Tucson and the border. The sun had nearly set by the time she stumbled into the outskirts of Nogales, exhausted and desperate. The town sat right on the border with Mexico, a dusty collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that catered to miners, cowboys, and the occasional smuggler looking to move goods across the international line. Willa kept her head down as she made her way through the streets, her long dark hair tucked up under a battered hat she had found discarded on the trail days ago. She needed food, a place to rest, and most importantly, she needed to figure out if there was any way to prove her innocence. The thought of spending the rest of her life as a fugitive made her stomach turn. She was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of the constant fear that shadowed her every step. The saloon on the corner of the main street looked busy, which meant she could slip in without drawing too much attention. Willa pushed through the swinging doors and immediately regretted her decision. The room was packed with men, their voices loud with whiskey and laughter. Tobacco smoke hung thick in the air, and the sound of a badly tuned piano competed with the general din of conversation. She was about to turn and leave when a hand caught her arm. Willa spun, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept tucked in her belt, only to find herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, and there was something solid and reassuring about the way he stood, like he was a man who knew exactly who he was and did not apologize for it. "Easy there," he said, releasing her arm immediately. "Did not mean to startle you. You just looked a bit lost is all." Willa's heart was still racing, but she forced herself to relax. "I am fine," she said, keeping her voice low. "Just looking for a meal." The cowboy studied her for a moment, and Willa had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see right through her disguise. But when he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "Place gets rowdy after dark. Might be better to try the boarding house down the street. Mrs. Chen serves a good supper and it is quieter." "I appreciate the advice," Willa said, edging toward the door. "Name is Vincent Carter," the cowboy said. "I work the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here. If you are looking for honest work, they are always needing help in the kitchen or with the laundry." Willa paused, studying this stranger who seemed genuinely concerned about a dusty drifter he had never met before. Vincent Carter had an honest face, all strong angles and laugh lines around his eyes. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, old enough to have earned the confidence he wore like a second skin, but young enough that life had not yet hardened him completely. "Thank you," she managed, and then she was out the door, gulping in the cool evening air. She found the boarding house right where Vincent had said it would be. A neat adobe building with a hand-painted sign that read Chen's Rooms and Meals. A small Chinese woman answered her knock, her face creasing into a warm smile when Willa asked about supper. Come in," Mrs. Chen said, ushering her inside. "You look half-starved, child. Sit, I will bring food." The dining room was small but clean, with 4 tables covered in checkered cloths. Only one other guest was present, an elderly man who nodded politely before returning to his soup. Willa sank into a chair by the window, positioning herself so she could watch the street outside. Mrs. Chen returned with a steaming bowl of beef stew and a thick slice of bread still warm from the oven. "You pay after you eat," she said kindly. "No rush." The food was the best thing Willa had tasted in weeks, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, not wanting to draw attention by wolfing it down like the starving woman she was. As she ate, she tried to think through her options. She could cross into Mexico tonight, but that felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. The real killer was still free, probably laughing at how perfectly his plan had worked. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice when someone else entered the dining room until he was standing beside her table. Willa looked up to find Vincent Carter removing his hat, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to bother you again," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you found the place all right." "I did, thank you," Willa said, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look. "Mind if I sit?" Vincent asked. "Already ate, but Mrs. Chen makes the best coffee in 3 counties, and I could use a cup before I head back to the ranch." Willa hesitated, but there was something about this cowboy that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. She nodded toward the empty chair across from her. Vincent settled into his seat with the easy grace of a man who spent most of his life on horseback. Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee for him and a cup for Willa as well, though she had not asked for one. "So what brings you to Nogales?" Vincent asked, wrapping his hands around the steaming mug. Willa had prepared an answer for this question, had rehearsed it a dozen times in her head. "Just passing through," she said. "Looking for work. Heading somewhere in particular, not really. Wherever there is work, I suppose." Vincent took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You are running from something," he said quietly, and it was not a question. Willa's hand froze halfway to her own cup. "I do not know what you mean." "I have been working cattle since I was 15 years old," Vincent said. "Spent a lot of time around animals, and you learn to read the signs. The way they hold themselves, the way they startle at every little sound. You have that same look, like you are ready to bolt at the first sign of danger." "Maybe I just do not like strangers asking personal questions," Willa said, but there was no real heat in her words. "Fair enough," Vincent said. "But if you are in some kind of trouble, might help to talk to someone about it. I am a pretty good listener." Willa wanted to trust him, wanted to unburden herself of the terrible weight she had been carrying alone for weeks, but trust was a luxury she could not afford. "I appreciate your concern, but I am fine. Really." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out on the table between them, and Willa's blood turned to ice. It was a wanted poster, and her own face stared back at her from the grainy photograph. "Saw these going up all over town this afternoon," Vincent said softly. "Marshall from Tucson came through earlier, asking if anyone had seen you. Said you murdered a man in cold blood." Willa's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, her mind already calculating the distance to the door, the quickest route out of town. But Vincent's next words stopped her cold. "Thing is, I do not believe it." She turned to stare at him. "What?" "I do not believe you killed anyone," Vincent repeated, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I have looked into the eyes of killers before, and you do not have that look. You have the look of someone who is scared and running and does not know who to trust, but not a killer." Willa's legs felt weak and she sank back into her chair. "It does not matter what you believe," she whispered. "The law says I am guilty." "Then tell me what really happened," Vincent said, "from the beginning." And somehow, despite every instinct screaming at her to run, Willa found herself telling this stranger everything. She told him about the embezzlement she had discovered, about Henry Blackwell and his investigation, about finding the body and pulling out the letter opener in a moment of panic. She told him about Marshall Grayson and his friendship with Victor Sterling, about the deputy who had helped her escape, about the 3 weeks she had spent running for her life. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as her story unfolded. When she finally fell silent, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. "This Sterling fellow," he finally said. "He is still working at the mine, as far as I know. Why would he run? He got exactly what he wanted. I am the one they are looking for." "Because if you are right, then he committed murder and embezzlement. Those are hanging offenses. Man like that, he is going to be nervous, looking over his shoulder, wondering if you left any evidence behind." "I did not have time to gather evidence," Willa said bitterly. "I barely had time to run." "But he does not know that," Vincent pointed out, "and men who are nervous make mistakes. They get sloppy." "What are you saying?" Vincent leaned forward, his eyes intent. I am saying maybe we can prove your innocence. Get you out from under this cloud so you can stop running. We, Willa repeated. You do not even know me. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? Because it is the right thing to do, Vincent said simply. And because I do not like seeing innocent people suffer when the guilty go free. My father was a judge before he passed, taught me that justice means something. It is supposed to matter. Your father sounds like a good man. He was the best man I ever knew, Vincent said, and there was a weight of grief in his voice that told Willa the loss was still fresh. Died about a year ago. Heart just gave out one day while he was working in his garden, but he raised me to believe that standing up for what is right is more important than staying safe. Willa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Even if you could prove Sterling was guilty, Marshal Grayson would never believe it. He has already made up his mind about me. Then we go over his head, Vincent said. Take the evidence to the territorial governor if we have to, but first we need to get that evidence. How? We go back to Tucson, Vincent said, quiet-like. You stay hidden while I do some digging. Talk to people, see what I can find out about Sterling and these missing funds. Someone must have seen something that night, someone who was too scared to speak up before. That is insane, Willa said. Tucson is the last place I should be. If someone recognizes me, I will hang. Which is why you will stay hidden, Vincent repeated. I have a cousin who lives on the outskirts of town. Sarah and her husband Tom have a small farm and they are good people. You can stay with them while I investigate. Why are you doing this? Willa asked again. What is in it for you? Vincent was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. My father spent his whole career trying to make sure justice was served. He believed that the law was supposed to protect people, not condemn the innocent. I watched him break his heart over cases he could not solve, over people he could not help. When he died, I swore I would try to live by the same principles he taught me. So when I see someone who needs help, someone who deserves a chance at justice, I cannot just walk away. There was such sincerity in his voice that Willa felt something inside her chest crack open, a warmth spreading through the cold fear that had gripped her for weeks. I do not know how I could ever repay you. Let us focus on clearing your name first, Vincent said with a slight smile. We can worry about repayment after you are free. They talked long into the night, planning their approach and working out the details. Vincent would ride back to the Triple Bar Ranch in the morning to collect his wages and let his boss know he needed some time away for family business. Then he would head to Tucson, taking a circuitous route in case anyone was watching. Willa would stay at Mrs. Chen's boarding house for a few days, keeping to her room and out of sight before Vincent came back to fetch her. It is going to take time, Vincent warned as they finally stood to leave. Could be weeks before we find what we need. I have been running for 3 weeks already, Willa said. A few more weeks does not matter as long as there is hope at the end of it. Vincent reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance. There is hope. I promise you that, Mrs. Chen showed Willa to a small room on the second floor, asking no questions about her extended stay, or the fact that she wanted to take her meals in her room. The old woman had been in Nogales long enough to recognize when someone needed discretion, and she simply nodded and promised to bring breakfast up in the morning. Willa lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. For the first time since this nightmare began, she was not alone. Vincent Carter, a cowboy she had met only hours ago, believed her story and was willing to risk his own safety to help prove her innocence. It seemed too good to be true, and part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to turn out to be some kind of trap. But when morning came and Vincent appeared with supplies and a plan, That cynical voice in her head grew quieter. He had brought her clean clothes from a general store in town, practical riding gear that would be less conspicuous than the torn dress she had been wearing. He had also brought food for the journey, a bedroll and a small pistol. "Know how to use one of these?" he asked, showing her how to load and fire the weapon. "My father taught me when I was young," Willa said. "We lived pretty far out from town, and he wanted to make sure I could protect myself." "Good," Vincent said. "I do not expect trouble, but it pays to be prepared." He left that afternoon, promising to return within the week. Willa watched from her window as he mounted his horse and rode north out of town, a strange ache settling in her chest. In the span of less than 24 hours, this cowboy had become her lifeline, the one person standing between her and the gallows. The days passed slowly. Mrs. Chen brought meals and made quiet conversation when Willa seemed receptive, sharing stories about her journey from China to Arizona and the husband who had died in a mining accident, leaving her to fend for herself. There was a kinship in their circumstances, both women who had lost everything and were trying to build something new from the ashes. True to his word, Vincent returned 6 days later, his face dusty from the road but his eyes bright with purpose. "Found Sarah and Tom," he said when they were alone in her room. "Explained the situation. They are willing to help." "And what did you tell them exactly?" Willa asked nervously. "The truth," Vincent said. "That you are being falsely accused of murder and that we are going to prove your innocence." Tom used to work as a clerk in the territorial court, so he knows how these things work. He's going to help us figure out what evidence we need to present a solid case. They left Nogales the next morning before dawn, riding hard through the desert. Vincent set a punishing pace, wanting to cover as much ground as possible before the sun grew too hot. They stopped only briefly to water the horses and rest in whatever shade they could find, pressing on until the lights of Tucson appeared in the distance as the sun began to set. Sarah and Tom Mitchell's farm sat about 3 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small house, a barn and fields where they grew vegetables to sell at the market. Sarah was a plump woman with kind eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron, and she embraced Willa like a long-lost sister the moment they arrived. "Vincent told us what happened," she said, ushering Willa inside. "Absolutely terrible, just terrible. But do not you worry, dear. We are going to sort this out." Tom was a serious man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the careful manner of someone who thought before he spoke. Over supper, they discussed the case in detail, with Tom asking pointed questions about the embezzlement scheme and the murder. "The key is going to be proving that Sterling had both motive and opportunity," Tom said, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "If we can show he was embezzling money and that Henry Blackwell discovered it, that establishes motive. Then we need to place him at the scene of the crime." "The deputy, Tom Henderson, he saw Sterling leaving the building that night," Willa said, "but he was afraid to speak up against the marshal." "We need more than one witness," Tom said, "and we need hard evidence of the embezzlement. Can you remember which ledgers showed the discrepancies?" Willa closed her eyes, picturing the office where she had spent so many hours. "The payroll ledger from March through September of this year," she said slowly, "and the invoice records for equipment purchases. There were payments being made to men who did not exist, and equipment orders that were never delivered." "Then that is where we start," Tom said. "Those ledgers will still be in the office, assuming Sterling has not destroyed them." "Vincent, do you think you can get access to the mining company offices?" "I can try," Vincent said. "Might be able to pose as someone looking for work, get a look around." "Too risky," Tom said, shaking his head. "If anyone recognizes you as being associated with Willa, It could blow the whole investigation. No, we need someone Sterling would never suspect. I know someone, Sarah said suddenly. Rebecca Harris. She has been cleaning the mining company offices for years. No one pays any attention to the cleaning lady, and she is absolutely discreet. I helped her daughter through a difficult situation last year, and she owes me a favor. Over the next week, they carefully assembled their case. Rebecca agreed to help, and she spent her evening cleaning shifts carefully photographing pages from the suspect ledgers using a small camera Tom had borrowed from a friend. It was painstaking work, and there were several close calls when Sterling worked late, but Rebecca was resourceful and determined. While the evidence was being gathered, Vincent spent his days talking to people who worked at the mine, buying drinks at saloons, and asking casual questions about Sterling. What he learned painted a picture of a man who lived well beyond his means, who gambled heavily, and always seemed to have money despite his modest salary. Found a dealer at one of the gambling halls who says Sterling lost nearly $200 in a single night last month, Vincent reported one evening. That is more than most miners make in 6 months. When I asked where he got that kind of money, the dealer just laughed and said Sterling always paid his debts. That helps establish he had a reason to embezzle, Tom said, carefully organizing the photographs Rebecca had delivered. But we still need to place him at the murder scene. That breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Vincent had been talking to one of the cooks at a restaurant near the mining offices, a young man named Daniel who remembered seeing Sterling the night of the murder. He came in around 8 o'clock that evening, Daniel told Vincent. Ordered a whiskey, drank it fast, then left in a hurry. Seemed agitated, kept checking his pocket watch. I remember because he usually lingered, tried to chat up the waitresses, but that night he was all business. Did you see which direction he went when he left? Toward the mining offices, Daniel said. I remember thinking it was odd because the offices close at 6. Vincent pressed a silver dollar into the young man's hand. Would you be willing to testify to that in court? Daniel hesitated, clearly nervous, but finally nodded. If it means the truth comes out, then yes. As the evidence mounted, Willa found herself spending more time with Vincent. He would return to the farm each evening with updates, and they would sit on the porch after supper, talking as the stars emerged overhead. She learned that he had grown up in Santa Fe, the only son of a judge and a schoolteacher who had instilled in him a love of learning and a strong moral compass. He had come to Arizona 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of open land and honest work, and had been cowboying ever since. Do you like it? Willa asked one night. Working cattle, I mean. I do, Vincent said thoughtfully. There is something satisfying about working with your hands, about being outside under the sky instead of cooped up in some office. And cattle are honest, you know. They do not lie or pretend to be something they are not. Unlike people, Willa said softly. Unlike some people, Vincent corrected. He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light from the house, she could see the warmth in his eyes. You are honest, Willa. That is one of the first things I noticed about you. You could barely see my face under that hat I was wearing, she said with a slight laugh. I could see your eyes, Vincent said. And eyes do not lie. Yours were scared and tired, but they were not guilty. That is how I knew. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing since the night they met. Willa found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she could not name. Vincent reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. When this is over, he said quietly, when your name is cleared and you are free, I would like your permission to court you properly. Take you to dinner, go for rides, all the things respectable folks do. Willa's throat felt tight with emotion. "And if we cannot clear my name, if we fail?" "We will not fail," Vincent said with absolute certainty. "But even if the worst happened, even if you had to spend the rest of your life running, I would run with you. I know that probably sounds insane. We have only known each other a few weeks. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "It does sound insane," Willa agreed, but she was smiling through the tears that streaked down her face. "But I feel the same way. You are the first good thing that has happened to me in a very long time, Vincent Carter." He leaned forward and kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise of all the things they could have together once this nightmare was behind them. Willa melted into the kiss, letting herself imagine for just a moment what life could be like without fear, without running, with this good and honest man beside her. The moment was interrupted by Tom clearing his throat politely from the doorway. "Sorry to intrude, but Rebecca just arrived with news. Sterling has been called to a meeting with the mine owner tomorrow morning, something about irregularities in the accounts." They all gathered in the kitchen, where Rebecca was catching her breath and accepting a glass of water from Sarah. "I was cleaning the owner's office tonight when I heard him talking to his assistant," she explained. "Apparently someone sent him an anonymous letter pointing out the discrepancies in the payroll and equipment invoices. He is furious, wants answers immediately." "That is perfect," Tom said, his eyes gleaming behind his spectacles. "Sterling will be rattled off balance. That is when people make mistakes." "We should be there," Vincent said, "hidden somewhere we can watch what happens." "Too dangerous," Tom countered. "If Sterling sees Willa, he will know immediately what is happening." "Then I will go alone," Vincent said. "Find a spot where I can observe the meeting without being seen. If Sterling confesses or says anything incriminating, I will be there to witness it." They argued about it for another hour, but Vincent was adamant. Finally, they worked out a plan. Vincent would position himself near the mine owner's office early in the morning before Sterling arrived for the meeting. Tom would wait nearby with a federal marshal he knew and trusted, a man named James Crawford who had no connection to the Tucson marshal's office. If Sterling said anything incriminating, Vincent would signal Tom, and they would move in immediately. Willa hated the plan, hated the idea of Vincent putting himself at risk, but she could see the determination in his eyes and knew there was no point in arguing. That night, after the others had gone to bed, she found him checking his gear in the barn. "Promise me you will be careful," she said from the doorway. Vincent looked up and smiled. "I promise. I have too much to live for now to take stupid risks." She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, strong and steady, and she tried to memorize the sound. "I do not know what I would do if something happened to you." "Nothing is going to happen," Vincent murmured against her hair. "By this time tomorrow, you are going to be free and we are going to start planning our future together." "Tell me about it," Willa whispered. "Tell me what that future looks like." Vincent pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Well, first I am going to take you on a proper picnic, somewhere with shade and a creek where we can sit and talk without worrying about who might see us. Then I am going to introduce you to everyone I know. Make sure the whole territory understands that you are an innocent woman who was wrongly accused. After that, once enough time has passed that it is respectable, I am going to ask you to marry me. Only if enough time has passed." Willa asked with a watery smile. "I am trying to be a gentleman about this," Vincent said, "but honestly I would marry you tomorrow if I thought you would say yes." "I would say yes," Willa said softly. "Tomorrow, next week, next year, whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." They held each other in the quiet barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, making promises for a future that still felt impossibly fragile. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Willa allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. Vincent left before dawn, riding into Tucson with Tom following at a discreet distance. Willa spent the morning pacing anxiously while Sarah tried to distract her with cooking and mending. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour like a day. By noon, she was nearly sick with worry. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when she heard horses approaching. Willa rushed to the window, her heart in her throat, and felt dizzy with relief when she saw Vincent dismounting in the yard. He was grinning, and Tom was right behind him, looking equally pleased. "It is over," Vincent said as soon as he was through the door. Sterling confessed to everything. Willa could barely process his words. "What?" The mine owner confronted him about the missing money, and Sterling just fell apart, Vincent explained, speaking quickly. Started making excuses, saying he was planning to pay it all back, that he never meant for anyone to get hurt. Then the owner asked about Henry Blackwell, and Sterling just broke down completely. Confessed to the murder, said Henry had discovered the embezzlement and threatened to go to the authorities. Sterling panicked and killed him. Marshal Crawford arrested him on the spot, Tom added. "We have his full confession, signed and witnessed." "Willa, you are officially cleared of all charges." The room seemed to tilt, and Willa found herself sitting down hard on one of the kitchen chairs. "I am free," she whispered. "You are free," Vincent confirmed, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "It is over, Willa. You can stop running." She started crying then, great heaving sobs of relief and joy and disbelief. Sarah wrapped her arms around her, rocking her gently while she wept. Vincent kept hold of her hands the entire time, his presence solid and reassuring. "Marshal Grayson is facing an investigation for his handling of the case," Tom said, looking satisfied. "Marshal Crawford was not pleased to learn that Grayson ignored evidence and arrested you based solely on circumstantial evidence. There will be consequences." It took several hours for everything to truly sink in. Marshal Crawford came to the farm himself that evening to formally apologize to Willa and present her with documents clearing her name. He was an older man with silver hair and a no-nonsense manner, and he was clearly embarrassed by his colleague's behavior. "I am deeply sorry for what you endured, Miss Kent," he said gruffly. "The law is supposed to protect citizens, not persecute them. You have my word that I will do everything in my power to ensure nothing like this happens again." "Thank you, Marshal," Willa said, her voice still shaky. "I am just grateful that the truth finally came out." After Crawford left, Sarah insisted on preparing a celebratory dinner. She cooked enough food for a small army, and they sat around the table laughing and talking late into the night. It felt surreal to Willa, this sudden return to normalcy after weeks of living in constant fear. But the best moment came later, after Tom and Sarah had retired for the evening, leaving Willa and Vincent alone on the porch once again. They sat close together on the bench, Vincent's arm around her shoulders, watching the stars wheel slowly across the desert sky. "So about that picnic," Vincent said softly. "How does next Sunday sound?" "Next Sunday sounds perfect," Willa said, leaning into his warmth. "Though I suppose we should probably wait a bit before you propose. We do not want to scandalize people." "I am not sure I care what people think," Vincent admitted. "But I will wait if that is what you want. Give you time to be sure about me." "I am already sure about you," Willa said, tilting her head to look up at him. "You are the man who believed me when no one else would. Who risked everything to prove my innocence. Who promised to run with me if running was the only option. I do not need more time to know that I love you, Vincent Carter." "I love you too," Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you in that saloon, looking like you were ready to bolt at any second. I wanted to protect you, to help you, to give you a reason to stop running." "You did," Willa whispered. "You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me back my life." They kissed again, and this time there was no one to interrupt them. The kiss deepened, filled with all the emotion and longing that had been building between them over the past weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said about waiting a respectable amount of time," he murmured. "But I am going to be thinking about marrying you every single day until I can actually ask properly." "Good," Willa said with a soft laugh, "because I am going to be thinking about saying yes." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Willa moved into a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house in Tucson, wanting to be close to Vincent but still maintaining propriety. She found work as a bookkeeper for a law firm whose senior partner had heard about her case and was impressed by her integrity. The pay was good, and the work was satisfying. Vincent visited as often as his duties at the Triple Bar Ranch allowed, and they spent every possible moment together. They went on that picnic he had promised, riding out to a beautiful spot by a creek where cottonwood trees provided shade and birds sang in the branches. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the pew while curious townspeople whispered and stared. Willa kept her head high, refusing to be ashamed of something she had not done. By December, the scandal had largely blown over. Sterling had been tried and convicted of both murder and embezzlement, sentenced to hang. Marshal Grayson had been removed from his position, and a new marshal had been appointed in his place. Life in Tucson returned to normal, and gradually, people stopped pointing and whispering when Willa walked down the street. On Christmas Eve, Vincent took her to dinner at the finest restaurant in town. He wore a suit that looked uncomfortable on his cowboy frame, and Willa wore a new dress in deep blue that Sarah had helped her sew. They ate by candlelight, talking and laughing, and Willa thought she had never been happier in her entire life. After dinner, Vincent suggested a walk despite the cold. They strolled through the quiet streets, their breath making clouds in the frigid air. When they reached the small park in the center of town, Vincent stopped beside a fountain and turned to face her. "I know I said I would wait," he began, and Willa felt her heart start to race. "But I have been thinking about this every day since you were cleared, and I cannot wait any longer. I love you, Willa Kent. I love your courage and your intelligence and your determination to see justice done. I love the way you laugh and the way you look at the world. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." He dropped to one knee right there in the park, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the moonlight. "Will you marry me?" Vincent asked, his blue eyes shining with emotion. "Yes," Willa said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with such joy and tenderness that Willa felt like her heart might burst. They were married in early March, in a small ceremony at the church with Sarah and Tom standing as witnesses. Willa wore a simple white dress, and Vincent wore his suit with a new tie that Sarah had given him as a gift. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with such enthusiasm that everyone in the small congregation laughed and applauded. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in town, too impatient to wait until they could travel anywhere more romantic. Vincent was gentle and patient, making sure Willa felt cherished and loved. They talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future, making plans for the life they would build together. A few weeks after the wedding, Vincent's boss at the Triple Bar Ranch offered to sell them a small parcel of land on the edge of the property. It was not much, just 100 acres with a creek running through it, but it was enough to start their own small ranch. Vincent and Willa threw themselves into building their future, working side by side to construct a modest house and barn, to fence pastures and buy their first few head of cattle. The work was hard, but Willa had never been happier. She loved waking up each morning beside Vincent, loved working together toward a common goal, loved the sense of building something permanent after so many months of running and uncertainty. Vincent was everything she could have hoped for in a husband, patient and kind and endlessly supportive. By the time their first anniversary rolled around, the ranch was well established, and they had a small but growing herd of cattle. They celebrated with another picnic by the creek, reminiscing about how they had met and everything that had happened since. "Can you believe it has only been a year and a half since that night in Nogales?" Willa asked, lying on the blanket with her head on Vincent's chest. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," Vincent said, running his fingers through her long dark hair. "And sometimes it feels like yesterday. I remember seeing you in that saloon, looking so lost and scared and just knowing I had to help you." "Best decision you ever made," Willa teased. "Best decision I ever made," Vincent confirmed, kissing the top of her head. "Though I think the real best decision was when I asked you to marry me." "And when I said yes," Willa added. They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek burble over the rocks and the breeze rustle through the cottonwood leaves. Finally, Willa propped herself up on one elbow to look down at her husband. "I have some news," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Vincent's eyes widened. "Are you?" "I am," Willa confirmed. "I am expecting. The doctor says the baby should arrive in early October." Vincent let out a whoop of joy and pulled her down for a kiss. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Willa asked, though she could already see the answer written all over his face. "I am more than happy," Vincent said. "I am ecstatic, overjoyed, absolutely thrilled. When did you find out?" "I suspected for a few weeks, but I went to the doctor yesterday to be sure. I wanted to wait until today to tell you, on our anniversary." "Best anniversary present ever," Vincent declared, kissing her again. The months of Willa's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Vincent built a cradle with his own hands, sanding and polishing the wood until it gleamed. Sarah came out to the ranch frequently to help Willa sew baby clothes and prepare the nursery. They talked about names, finally settling on William Vincent if the baby was a boy, and Louise Grace if it was a girl. In early October, just as the doctor had predicted, Willa went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Vincent feared he might lose her. But Willa was strong, stronger than even she had realized, and after nearly 12 hours of labor, their son was born. William Vincent Carter came into the world wailing, his tiny face red and scrunched up with indignation. But the moment Willa held him, the moment she looked down at that perfect little face, she fell completely in love. Vincent was no better, staring at his son with such wonder and awe that tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. William immediately grasped his father's finger, holding on with surprising strength. "He is," Willa agreed softly. "Our little miracle." The years that followed were full and rich. They added to their ranch bit by bit, buying more land and more cattle as their circumstances allowed. William grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved following his father around the ranch and helping with the animals. When he was 3, Willa gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas Michael and Rose Elizabeth. The house was suddenly full of noise and laughter, and the constant chaos that came with 3 young children. Willa continued to do bookkeeping from home, helping other ranchers and business owners with their accounts. It gave her something to do while the children napped and brought in extra income that allowed them to expand the ranch even further. Vincent proved to be a natural rancher, with an instinct for cattle and horses that served them well. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Willa and Vincent would sit on the porch as they had that first night at Sarah and Tom's farm, watching the stars and talking about their day. Sometimes they reminisced about how they met, about those terrifying weeks when Willa was running for her life and Vincent was just a stranger who decided to help. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Willa asked one night when William was 5 and the twins were 2. "If you had not come into that saloon, if you had not believed me." "All the time," Vincent admitted. "And every time I do, I thank God that I was in the right place at the right time, because I cannot imagine my life without you and the children. You are everything to me." "You saved my life," Willa said, as she had said many times over the years. "In every way that matters." "We saved each other," Vincent corrected gently. "You gave me purpose, Willa. You gave me a reason to be the man my father raised me to be. You gave me a family and a home and a life that means something. So if anyone did the saving, it was you." They kissed in the starlight, still as much in love as they had been that first night in Nogales. The years had added some gray to Vincent's hair and some lines around Willa's eyes, but the connection between them had only grown stronger with time. When William turned 10, he started helping more seriously with the ranch work, proving himself to be as hardworking and reliable as his father. The twins were 8 by then, inseparable and constantly getting into mischief. Rose had inherited her mother's head for numbers and loved helping with the bookkeeping, while Tom was obsessed with horses and spent every free moment in the barn. The ranch had grown to nearly 500 acres by then, with a substantial herd and a reputation for quality cattle. Vincent had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse and took their meals with the family. Willa ran the household with the same efficiency she brought to everything else, managing the cooking and cleaning and child-rearing with grace. One evening, when Willa was 34 and Vincent was 37, they received a letter from Tom Mitchell. Sarah had passed away suddenly from pneumonia, and Tom was struggling to manage the farm alone. Without hesitation, Vincent and Willa invited him to come live with them, to help run the ranch and be part of their family. Tom arrived a month later, gray-haired now but still sharp as ever. He threw himself into ranch work, with the same careful precision he had brought to his legal career, and quickly became an indispensable part of the operation. The children adored their Uncle Tom, and he doted on them in return, telling them stories about their mother's bravery and their father's determination to see justice done. Years continued to pass in this happy rhythm. William grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and building his own house on the far corner of the Carter land. The twins married in their early 20s, Tom to a schoolteacher from Tucson, and Rose to a young lawyer who reminded Willa of Vincent with his strong sense of justice and gentle manner. By the time Willa and Vincent celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, they were grandparents several times over. Their home was often filled with grandchildren running and playing, filling the air with laughter. Tom had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years prior, content and surrounded by the family that had adopted him as their own. On their anniversary, Vincent took Willa back to that spot by the creek where they had picnicked so many times over the years. They were older now, their hair more gray than not, their movements a bit slower than they used to be. But the love between them was as strong as ever. 30 years, Willa said wonderingly, sitting on the blanket Vincent had spread beneath the cottonwood trees. Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I was that you walked into that saloon. I was the lucky one, Vincent insisted, as he always did when this conversation came up. I found the love of my life when I was least expecting it. We built a good life together, did we not? Willa asked, looking around at the ranch that stretched out in every direction, at the house they had built with their own hands, at the legacy they were leaving for their children and grandchildren. The best life, Vincent agreed. And it all started because I believed you when you told me you were innocent, because I saw the truth in your eyes, and because you were brave enough to help a stranger when everyone else would have looked the other way, Willa added. They sat together as the sun set, painting the desert in those same shades of copper and gold that Willa remembered from that first desperate day when she had stumbled into Nogales. She had been alone then, terrified and running for her life, with no hope and no future. Now she had everything she could have dreamed of and more. "I love you," she said to Vincent, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Vincent replied, pulling her close. "Yesterday, today, and forever." As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, they remained by the creek, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life filled with love, family, and the kind of happiness that comes from facing adversity together and emerging stronger on the other side. The past was behind them, full of fear and running and narrow escapes. But it had led them here to this moment, to this life they had created together. And that, Willa thought as she rested her head on her husband's shoulder, was worth everything they had endured. She had been hiding from lawmen who blamed her wrongly, and Vincent had believed her and rode to prove her innocence. In the process, they had found something more precious than justice or freedom. They had found each other, and that made all the difference. The night grew deeper, and eventually they gathered their things and walked back to the house hand in hand, their path lit by the moon and stars. Inside, the lamps were burning bright, and through the windows they could see their children and grandchildren gathered for the anniversary celebration. There was laughter and warmth and love filling every corner of the home they had built. Vincent paused on the porch, looking at Willa with that same expression he had worn 30 years ago when he first decided to help her. "Ready to go celebrate with our family?" "More than ready," Willa said, squeezing his hand. "Let us go be with the people we love." They walked through the door together, stepping into the light and warmth and the beautiful, noisy chaos of family. Behind them, the desert night was vast and quiet, holding its secrets and its stories. But inside the Carter home, there was only joy and love and the satisfaction of a life well lived. And somewhere in Nogales, in a small boarding house run by an old Chinese woman, the legend was still told of the woman who was wrongly accused and the cowboy who believed in her innocence enough to risk everything to prove it. It was a story of justice and courage, but most of all, it was a story about love, the kind of love that changes everything and makes even the darkest times worth surviving. That story would be passed down through generations, a reminder that believing in someone when no one else will can make all the difference in the world. The end.